by implication, you're comparing the ERG to the Nazi Party, or at least to the South African racists. Now, whatever you think about the ERG, that was an unacceptable comparison, wasn't it?
Andrew, I would say that wasn't strong enough. In
Really?
1938, there were allies who hatched a plan for Hitler to annex part of Czechoslovakia, and Churchill said no, and he stood alone.
He did.
We must not appease. We're in a situation now, and let me just be clear, I'm an ethnic minority. We have in the ERG, in Jacobs Rees-Mogg, someone who is happy to put onto his web pages the horrible, racist AfD party, a party that's Islamophobic and on the far right of the German system. They're happy to use the phrase grand wizard. KKK is what it evokes to me when I think of that phrase, and the Deep South. I'm sorry, but very, very seriously, of course we should not appease that. Of course we should not appease that.
Jacob Rees-Mogg has been absolutely clear that he does not endorse the AfD, and the grand wizard stuff, we don't know where that came from. It's a dangerous thing, surely, to accuse him of being close to Nazi ideology.
We do know that Boris Johnson is with Steve Bannon, who is a white supremacist. We do know that there are links between Viktor Orban, Salvini and others. I'm not backing off on this. Never will I back off on this on behalf of my constituents. And the BBC should not allow this extreme hard right fascism to flourish. And often these are
elected
side of
Conservative MPs.
I don't care how elected they were. So was the far right in Germany. They're often elected, often giving a cover for the thugs on the ground. And I'm afraid when people are experiencing rising hate and extremism in this country, we must not concede ground. We must fight it and call it out for what it is.
I just can't believe that David Lammy could come out with something as absolutely ludicrous as that. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not far right. I believe in democracy. We've had a referendum. I also believe in sticking with our manifesto pledges that we'll come out of the single market, the customs union, the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. What I think is that if politicians want to regain the support of the people, we need to deliver on our promises. And we're failing to do that at the moment, and you're seeing the repercussions of that for Conservative Party support. And surely that's what should happen to any political party that doesn't stick to its manifesto promises.
What does it make you feel like when someone like David Lammy calls you basically a racist and a fascist, and likens you to someone who deliberately murdered 6 million Jewish people? I mean, what does that feel like? Well,
it's ludicrous. I mean, it's insulting. I'm embarrassed for him, actually. The European Research Group is not a homogenous group. It's a group of MPs who believe in Brexit and delivering on our mandate, the promises we made to the British people. And it's a very, very diverse group. I'm sure Suella Braverman will be absolutely disgusted at being called a Nazi. I mean, it's just I find it deeply insulting. To be honest, I mean, Mr. Lammy is a bit of a self-publicist, and he's not really the sharpest tool in the box, is he?
I'm Jewish, and I may get a bit emotional, so please bear with me.
Okay.
Members of my family died in the Holocaust, and he demeans their memories of my relatives. And I do not consider Boris Johnson or Jacob Rees-Mogg Nazis, far from it. And for a member of the Labour Party to call Boris and Jacob Nazis, when members of his own party are clearly anti-Semitic, it's worse than ironic.
There's no question an awful lot of what he says for effect. But he doesn't realise, like he did on Sunday, the types of people like yourself, Michael, who are affected by it, but not politically, emotionally.
Yeah, exactly. I went to Auschwitz last year for a commemoration. And if he really wants to know what a Nazi is, I'm sure he hasn't been there. But he and the rest of the Labour Party should visit Auschwitz, educate themselves, and find out what a real Nazi is. So just to loosely term people Nazis. I would never use that of anybody in the Labour Party. I would never say they were Nazis.
No.
Some of them are actually endorsing, they're defending Lammy's comments, saying, you don't know what it's like to experience racism. So Lammy speaking in a special place where he feels, no, he's a race-baiting chancellor of a politician. He's using the identity politics game card for all his work, and actually sowing dissent and misery. He's creating racial division. He's annoying people who just want to get along and don't want these everything to be about whether you're black or white or this hierarchy of privilege whereby the white male is the lowest of the low, and then there's a sort of a graded system where if you're I don't know what, black, female, disabled, Muslim, you probably come at the top, and down it goes. It's ridiculous. 17.4 million people voted for Brexit, and what Lammy is doing is saying you are all Nazis, you are all racists, and that for trying to act on the will of those people, that the ERG, the European Research Group, are actually doing something wrong, whereas they're not. They're just trying to apply the basic rules of democracy. That if you vote for something, if the majority votes for something, and they're promised their vote is going to be honoured, that's what they get. So in fact, they're far from being Nazis. They're champions of democracy, the European Research Group.
I don't think he's gone too far. I think David's making a very powerful point in terms of something that we all must take very seriously. I'm really concerned about our current government and where it's going, the direction which it's going and has been going. And I went to see Michelle Obama yesterday, and she said something that I thought was quite profound. She said, power doesn't change who you are, it exposes who you are. And I think as we see more and more people edge towards power, it's becoming quite exposing in terms of who they are. So David mentioned Boris Johnson, and I was reading about Boris being an unreconstructed racist bigot and some of the things that he's been up to. And there was a story about Natalie Rowe, who we will remember being George Osborne's friend, and she's a black woman. And she was at a party, and she was the only black person at the party. She was the only person of any colour at the party. And Boris went up to her with a watermelon, making monkey noises.
This is obviously her allegation.
This is her allegation, and also I think somebody else in another story that I read backed it up. And then you start thinking about Michael Gove, where the BBC mentioned about the Grand Wizard, and we don't know where it came from. Well, another allegedly, if you like, Michael Gove was he was a guest speaking at an annual conference for the Society of Legal Scholars, where he allegedly said, "I feel rather like a Grand Wizard of the KKK giving an address to the AGM of Black Lives Matters."
An unfortunate choice of phrase,
well,
I would say.
It's more than an unfortunate choice of phrase. I could go on in regards to the MP that used the N-word with a couple of her colleagues at an event and was, reinstated, and we don't know why or how, if she went on a training course to say that, you should not use the N-word. Just last week, Roger Scruton used some really despicable language of, he was channeling white supremacists, and in the end the Conservative government did get rid of him as an advisor. But
it's just going on and using Nazis and what they were aiming to do even before they started Holocaust, started gassing people by the million. There's extremism and there is extremism, and it's difficult to think of a more extremist ideology than the Nazis.
Well, yes, was slavery. Slavery was pretty extreme too, and it starts by othering people, othering others. That's where it all starts. And I was reading the United Nations report, because we had a debate in the House of Commons last week on eradicating racism, and the UN report talks about the contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, discrimination, xenophobia and related intolerance. And it talks about the threat posed by nationalist populism. And it talks about nationalist populist ideologies and strategies that pose a sobering threat to racial equality by fueling discrimination, intolerance, and the creation of institutions and structures that will have an enduring legacy of racial exclusion. So it's this thing about the enduring legacy of racial exclusion. And then that got me to reading other bits of the report where they talk about India and Kenya and South Africa. And I'm reading it, I'm thinking, well, actually, that's the United Kingdom.
Well,
that's
some of the other things that they're...
Absolutely. And I give you two examples. 2nd of May this year, we've got local elections. And the government is trialling photo ID for voting, right? There's no real need for photo ID for voting in our country, but the government's tried.
We have had frauds, didn't we? There's some voter frauds in the Midlands in the 2015 elections.
I think it's like 0.0.
Oh, yeah, it's tiny, but there is some.
0.008%, something like that. I mean, it's a really, really, really minor. Anyway, so paragraph 26 of this report says, once they are in government, nationalist populists often deploy a range of tactics to disenfranchise groups portrayed as outsiders, including racial and ethnic minorities. These might include, for example, seemingly race-neutral measures, imposing specific photo identification and other requirements that disproportionately exclude marginalised groups from voting. And I thought, wow, that's really quite scary.
So this is a UN report into essentially how racism spreads.
Yep.
And you're reading it through the frame, if we like, of being a UK MP, and your various parts of the report are resonating with your experiences of being in the UK.
When I read, I thought the penny's dropping here, and I thought we have to do something to stop this before it gets out of control, because this is...
Where are you with Nigel Farage? I did promise the listeners on Friday we would be a Farage-free zone, and we were, so forgive me for returning to him today, but I believe it was on Thursday night last week that he was recorded at some kind of fringe meeting talking about putting on khaki and picking up a rifle to deliver Brexit. I mean,
I didn't even hear that.
Yeah, and I believe it wasn't reported by the BBC, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, and this is the thing. And he's saying this so that he can increase his populism because he wants to get re-elected, not knowing that the seeds that he's sowing, well, he probably does know this, how irresponsible he is, because the seeds that he is sowing in a growing group of people who are discontented in some way, who are, peed off in some way, he's almost giving them license to do things. And this is why hate is being fueled around the country. This is why we have attacks. This is why my friend was killed, who's a politician. This is why there's people in prison at the moment who tried to kill another one of my friends who's a politician. This is why, I've got somebody going to court because of threats against me. This is why it's getting, almost intolerable to be a politician, because you've got people like Nigel Farage who, for his own selfish needs and greed, is doing this for his own selfish...
But many of his supporters say that he was the only one talking about uncontrolled immigration, which was an area leading up to the referendum that clearly enormous amounts of people, millions and millions of people, thought was extremely important. He was saying the stuff that politicians like yourself weren't talking about.
But when he talked about uncontrolled immigration and the picture, did it actually show anybody from Europe?
No, it did
in
not.
That picture? So what's he talking about? Because that's what the EU's about, the people that he was showing in that picture.
I told him to his face that I thought the poster was racist.
It was so inflammatory, and the fact that we are encouraged, the fact that we are giving all these racists such a platform, and we are legitimising all of those views, and anybody else that says something else is like fake news. People are taking a leaf out of Trump's book, thinking, and Theresa May did exactly the same thing. And I said it before in terms of Theresa May and her institutionally racist policies. And what she's doing is she's developing policies that will have a long-lasting effect on marginalising groups, others. And it's a dangerous road that we're travelling down, and it has to stop. And that's why we need people to stand up against it at every stage.
I think it's really sad, because I think, basically it's complete rubbish, okay, first of all.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, ridiculous thing to say, I would have thought.
It's a ridiculous thing to say. And the thing is, David has been a fantastic advocate for many different communities who've been disadvantaged and left out. And what really saddens me about this is his voice will now be taken less seriously. Now, that's not a good thing, because this is a guy who has done an awful lot of good stuff for some communities that have been, ignored for far too long. So I think that's really sad, frankly. But it's also sad for a guy who, is basically a decent bloke. And I don't know why David's doing this, because it's just he must know he's wrong. There's no way he can actually think that these guys are Nazis. They're not. I mean, they're just not. I mean, I don't know how to put it. I mean, there's no way they are.
He's sort of being sensationalist, isn't he? He did it with the Stacey Dooley thing and lots of other sort of sensational headlines.
Do you think he's trying to put himself in the right sort of area as a possible leader of the Labour Party?
I don't know Labour Party internal dynamics well enough, but I wouldn't have thought he was in the right wing of the party, but maybe I'm wrong. Look, I don't know Labour Party dynamics well enough to really know that.
Right. To be honest, I think it's completely ridiculous, and I think the man made himself look an utter fool. Look, my father was in the Royal Navy in World War II. He fought the Nazis. So, to be compared to Nazis by someone is deeply, deeply offensive.
Isn't there a bit of an issue, though? I mean, you often talk about the world, the Second World War and defeating Nazism and things, and we fight them in the trenches and things. You often use a lot of these analogies. Wouldn't it just be better if everyone just stopped talking about the war and the Nazis and bombing people and picking up rifles? Wouldn't it be better if everyone just talked about the future rather than the past?
Well, but what David did was quite deliberate. And, in the ERG, look, we've been called all sorts of things over the last few months. The Chancellor of the Exchequer called us extremists. Chris Patten called us vermin. Donald Tusk memorably sent us all to hell. And then David's called us Nazis. What have we done? What sin have we committed, to receive all this opprobrium? We want to leave the European Union. I mean, we've not said we've not come out for the slaughter of the firstborn. We've just said we want to leave the EU, which is what 17.4 million people voted for, and you get called a Nazi in return. Personally, I think Lammy was ridiculous and should apologise.
He's made it very clear he's not going to. I have to say, I do agree that it's one of the things I find quite bizarre, the language that is used about the majority of people who voted in this country.
Because we've been so vilified, the thing that fortifies us is that we're arguing for what the British people voted for, and we'll continue to do that. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And, Gandhi had a great saying on this. He said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And we're determined to win because we're fighting, we believe, for 17.4 million British people and what they voted for. So people can call us all sorts of things, but we're absolutely committed to what we're doing. We're honouring promise to the British people as far as we're concerned, and we're going to carry on fighting whether people call us naughty names or not. So I hope I made that clear.